Ladies and gentlemen of the media, thank you for your patience and welcome to this press conference. With me today, I have to my immediate left the leader of the Alliance for Change, Mr. Nigel Hughes, followed by Member of Parliament, Director of Finance, and Chairman of the party, Mr. David Patterson, Member of Parliament. We will have a statement by Ms. Finance, after which we will invite your questions. Later on, we are expected to be joined by Ms. Laurie George, our advisor on hinterland affairs, and she will also prepare have a statement for you. Ms. Finance, if you will go ahead.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Good afternoon, all. Budget 2025 will be the fifth PPP budget being presented to the National Assembly that is being powered by oil revenues. With the last budget being $1.146 trillion, this year's budget is expected to be significantly larger. As we await the presentation of Budget 2025, we are also awaiting the completion of many projects from Budget 2024 and before. The infamous pump stations are yet to be completed. The new Demerara Harbour Bridge completion date is being pushed back often. Some projects are merely now seeing the sod being turned, while others seem to have pressed the pause button. 2024 was another year of corruption under the PPP, and with the year ending in a show of total incompetence as a $100,000 cash grant distribution commenced. To date, no efficient system has been put in place to properly manage the distribution of those checks as the population anxiously awaits. In short, 2024 was another year of the PPP's failure on full display. The PPP continues to lag behind with the non-oil sector. One startling example is the gold declaration for 2024 being 434,000 ounces. You would recall that in 2019, the last full year of the coalition being in government, gold declaration was 634,000 ounces. Today, with higher gold prices, the declaration is yet. The PPP management of the gold sector is clearly poor. Guyanese are yet to see significant increases in wages and salary as was promised by the PPP while they were in opposition, but rather the 2024 $1 trillion budget only resulted in 10% increase in public servants increase for public servants wages and salaries, with the early announcement also for 2025 increase at a meager 8% for public servants. Last year, as you will recall, the Alliance for Change had highlighted and called for several mechanisms, one of which was free education from North Rift University. We would like to say that we are pleased to note that after our call at the beginning, prior to Budget 2024 being read, that during the year 2024 this announcement was made. We note also that it is now being implemented, and we are happy that our calls for free education at the university level is being heard. We expect from Budget 2025 a significant increase in the income tax threshold, increase in the minimum wage, and again I will note that it was when the PPP was in opposition that they promised and they pledged that they would significantly increase minimum wage, and we are yet to see those numbers, particularly to match with the rising cost of living. Increase in old age pension, reduction in VAT, increase in the budgeted allocation to GCOM to cater for a more superior system that includes but is not limited to biometrics. This was a call that the AFC had made since 2024, and I think that it is important that we reiterate this call. We are pressed for time, as 2025 is a year for our expected election. We have been calling, and again I'm going to press that this is a call that the Alliance for Change made at the beginning of 2024. We're also asking for the reduce in the house lot allocation cost. This is a national cry and definitely needs to be reiterated as a call from the Alliance for Change should the government for serious consideration. The Alliance for Change believe that the government of the day has done absolutely nothing adequate when it comes to making sure that the lesser fortunate of Guyana are actually included in the developmental plans for the government. We continue to see the haves and the have-nots and the disparity being larger. We call on the government of the day to look at measures to make sure that all Guyanese benefit equitably from the distribution of the oil resources and not the biased way in which it is done now. I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nance. We will now, as we have Ms. Laura George here, we will be in a minute taking the statement from Ms. Laura George. Laura, welcome to our press conference for today.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I want to make a presentation on the Amerindian Land Titling Project. It's really unraveling the last, is it 4 years? Because most recently, the Minister of Amerindian Affairs reported, how many, that in 2024, $800 million was spent under the land titling project. And several villages were listed. For example, well, let me list them. Karasabai, she said, received its certificate of title. That means Karasabai was demarcated and therefore issued that certificate of title. Arau, so let me just say that Karasabai is actually a district. It was demarcated before, but was never completed because for several reasons. For example, that the surveyors were unable to get the entire area fully aligned under their work. Another village that's listed is Arau, that in 2024, Arau received its certificate of title. What we all need to know is that Arau received its absolute grant several years ago, and due to the work that Arau did during the time of the coalition, getting their maps and the description aligned, that Arau decided to agree to have demarcation. Because if they don't do this demarcation, then they cannot get their extension. The demarcation that was done for Arau still leave out their homes, their houses, the health center, the school, and all of their living areas outside of the demarcated area. So then what exactly are we doing under this land titling program, the land titling project, that is supposed to ensure that the land tenure rights of indigenous peoples are respected? Another village that the ministry cites receiving absolute grant is Hotokwai of Region 1. Now, I want to point out what looks to be this devious way or giving us smoke and mirrors, and which I find is very disrespectful to indigenous peoples and all of Guyana. And now, why do I say this? Hotokwai is listed as receiving its absolute grant last year. But what many of you don't know, and I'm sure the residents of Hotokwai are not aware, that this is the way that their situation is being presented, as because that to mean that they care. Hotokwai received its absolute grant several years ago. Hotokwai was demarcated in line with the absolute grant, but they also found that areas of their lands that they know to be their land were also cut out from the description that was given and cut out during the exercise of the demarcation during that year. So Hotokwai has been waiting a long time to get its extension. So its extension was recognized, or approved rather, by the government, because the Amerindian Act, it has to be granted by the state. And that piece of extension being approved by the state then required that the ministry and the government issues it absolute grant to that piece of extension. So not all of Hotokwai's lands, because as I said, Hotokwai had received an absolute grant years ago. The same thing goes with Hobadiah, which is a neighboring community to Hotokwai. Hobadiah received an absolute grant years ago. This is before the land titling project, which started in 2013. And they had been waiting for the extension a long time, which the PPP administration wants to say they now granted their absolute grant last year. But as I'm saying, this half piece of information being given to the public is really just devious. The absolute grant that's listed for Hobadiah of last year is really to that little piece or the extension that was granted. And so is Mokomoko, so is Akawini, and so was Sawariwao. These villages are listed as receiving the absolute grants, making it sound, perhaps to their convenience, they left out information that these absolute grants given last year were to the extensions, because those villages had their absolute grants, received their absolute grants way before under this titling project. Now, I have a table that we can probably circulate afterwards to those who are present that outlines the villages, how they have presented this information to us. Because the news also says that 21 villages were titled in the 4 years, from 2021 to 2024. But we don't see where these 21 villages are. But before I go to the rest of the so-called 21 villages, I want to point out that for the piece of extensions that the government still recognized and granted those absolute grants for it, for last year, the ministry reports that 800 million was spent under this project. The year before that, in 2023, the ministry reported, or the news media reports, that 500 million was allocated or probably spent. I don't know the whatever remained in that year. Now, let me start from 2021 and again bring an example of how this land titling project has been presented to the public and to shore up themselves, but in this devious manner that has been taking place. Now, in 2021, Kapui is listed as one of the villages that received its extension. In 2021, 630 million Ghana dollars was spent. Now, in 2021, Kapui receiving its extension means that Kapui had already received its absolute grant and been demarcated. In 2022, Kapui was listed to receiving its absolute grant to its extension. In that year, along with, I think it's several other villages in that year, 561 million Ghana dollars was spent in 2022, or allocated or spent, either one of those, but those are the figures that are carried in the press. In 2023, Kapui again is listed as receiving its certificate of title. So I don't know if you're following me. The reason I did this on a table is because it is so convoluted and confusing, perhaps with the intention that it has to be this way. But there has not been 21 villages. There has been one village that has been, I give you as an example to say, it has been mentioned from 21, 22, 23 to say that this village has been dealt with. And indigenous peoples need to pay attention, because when the budget is being presented tomorrow, how much more will the Minister of Armed Affairs be presenting to say, this is how much they want for land titling for this year, but at the same time, applying this disrespectful way to indigenous peoples and to all Guyana to say, this is how much it's costing, when actually it's being done at a snail's pace and not securing at all and respecting and protecting indigenous peoples' land tenure systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Laura George. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, we will now invite you to ask your questions. Of course, we ask that you observe the usual protocol of identifying yourself and the agency you represent. And I see Davina from Kaicho News. Davina, can you please ask your question? Go right ahead.
We're not hearing.
We're not hearing you, Davina. Davina?
Yes, can you hear me?
Clearly now, thank you.
Okay. Can Ms. Fernandez kindly clarify her statements on the equitable distribution of oil wealth she mentioned earlier?
Ms. Finance, can you explain the equitable distribution of oil wealth?
I heard the statement. When we talk about, I'm hearing a feedback, I'm not sure. Okay. When we talk about equity, it's more so of a conversation equity versus equality, and a lot of times, particularly when we talk about across the board increases, one of the things that we did speak about, the Alliance for Change has had conversations at the level of National Assembly. We have brought it to the debates and so forth. We have asked for resources in the country to be distributed in an equitable manner, meaning that who needs it the most gets it first, and who needs more get more, so that we will actually be having a more balanced system as against what we're having right now. It separates the system of the haves and the have-nots. We don't want a situation in which the majority of the wealth of the country is actually saturated and distributed to very small portion of the country. We talk about equitable distribution, we're talking about a more balanced distribution of the resources throughout the country.
Thank you, Joretta. I recognize Mr. Antonio Day. Antonio, can I ask you to ask your question, please? Invite you to ask your question.
Okay, good afternoon, members of the press.
Antonio?
Can you hear me? Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
I am not hearing Antonio as yet.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Antonio Day?
We are hearing him on the platform. Can you hear me?
We will come back to Antonio Day. I don't know what's happening there. And I recognize Mr. Adam Harris.
Yes, I was saying, can you hear me?
Maybe you have the volume up. You have the
There
volume up.
has to be a
Mr.
problem.
Harris?
Yes, I am hearing you and I'm talking with you, but you're not hearing me.
Ladies and gentlemen of the media, if you will bear with us, we're checking to see if the problem is at our end.
Is the microphone on? Sorry, not the microphone. The speaker. Is the volume of the speaker up?
Mr. Harris, can you unmute yourself? Adam, can you unmute yourself? Please
Yes,
go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Clearly now, thank you.
All right. But I'd like to defer to Antonio Day, who was ahead of me, please. If you take him, I'd be happy, please.
Okay, Antonio, are you ready?
Yes, Miss Alert. I was asking if you're hearing me. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Okay, great. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I have a question directed to Mr. Retta Fernandez as it relates to the 2025 budget. What proposals does the AFC have in terms of the government striking the balance? Because as you see that last year, lots of monies have been expended in capital projects, namely public infrastructure. What do you think should be done to correct the 2025 budget, knowing that we have projects that are incomplete?
Well, I think I believe the first thing we need to do is identify why projects are incompleted in the first place. The projects are incompleted because we see budgetary allocations going forward where there is no capacity to actually complete the work. So we have asked for prior, and I'm going to repeat it here at this press conference today, that the distribution of the resources, even at the level of the budget, be more people-centered as against being too infrastructural. And nothing against infrastructure, it's absolutely necessary, but we cannot have a budget that is capital heavy when there is a big issue with capacity, and that's what we've been seeing, hence all the delays of projects and so forth. Just every single region you go to, and I don't even have to go into proving this point, because it was none other than the head of state that called a 5:30 a.m. meeting to showcase that there are delays throughout the country. So what needs to happen is that those monies needs to be redirected into more people-centered policies. We need to have the problem of the high cost of living addressed. We need to make sure that the amount of persons living in poverty in Guyana is addressed, and there's only one way of looking at that. Those persons need to be targeted programs that looks at them directly, and not policies that PPP have in place that is dependent on a trickle-down system and in hope that they are going to somehow benefit at the end. We need to see more direct policy measures that is going to tackle those. So the budget needs to be balanced in a way that the budget policy measures are not just going and say, oh, we're going to put $5 billion one side to aid in poverty reduction. And then you see them go on to the end of the year and then just give it out sometimes. I'm not even sure what they did with it last year, so I'm going to address that in my budget presentation. But those are the things that we're looking at. Restructure the way in which the monies are spent. Stop allocating monies just to make sure that your friends and your family gets. And no, your friends are not all of Guyana, because all of Guyana is not benefiting. The government officials like to go out and say that, oh, well, we want to say that everyone are friends of the country, but they're not. When we have a significant portion of the country living in poverty, we're saying that resources needs to be distributed, that they benefit from those also. So that's how we're asking for it to be done.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Antonio Day?
Yes, Mr. Lord, I have a final question directed to Ms. Fernandez. And what specific initiatives in the budget 2025 should the government use to stimulate creation and economic growth?
Well, you're asking me to actually give you my 2025 budget speech right now, and I don't want to get into that as yet. We have budget being read tomorrow, and I already have my pre-speech write-up, so I'm going to ask that you allow me to just present it to the National Assembly first.
Thank you, Ms. Fernandez.
So, Mr. Day, at least that's one story you can get out of the budget debates.
Mr. Adam Harris, thank you for your courtesy, and I will now invite you to ask your question.
Thank you. This is for anybody. Now, in the past, budgets, given that the government represents a section of the community, budget presentation often involved the opposition. I make bold to say that that wasn't done this time around. I also make bold to say that no member of the opposition knows what's contained in the budget. How are you reacting to this? How much time do you think you'd be allowed to examine the budget presentation? Normally you get a week and a piece. Is that going to be enough with the suspected increase that Joretta was talking about?
That's a very important question, and we have stated our concerns even prior. We're seeing significant increases in the allocations, the budgetary allocations, but when it comes to the time to scrutinize those monies and where they're allocated, the time has not changed. And what I would say is that it's never a weekend change, because we're always given some, I think at one point we were given 4 days for 2024 budgets for us to scrutinize all, with no consideration that that was the first budget that went over $1 trillion, and that meant that there was significantly more projects being identified. But the bigger concern that we have is that the questions, while presented in the little time that we do have allocated, when asked the questions, the ministers give the most vague and sometimes completely political responses, and we never get a clear answer. So it presents to the public as though the National Assembly is just a big joke, and nobody is coming there to actually give answers to the questions being posed when we're scrutinizing the budget in the National Assembly. So that is the biggest concern.
Quick follow-up.
Just allow me to also add this. Previously, and you could know, because it was very well documented, that before the presentation of, at least under the coalition, the opposition were actually invited, and and you would know that, to make a presentation or make their submissions to the then Minister, Vincent Jordan. They may complain about how many of their recommendations were incorporated, but at least they were afforded the opportunity to put their concerns on record prior to the reading and the finalization of the budget. Sadly, that courtesy on behalf of at least 50% of the population has not been extended by the PPP, Budget 25 in particular, which will, and you will hear this quite often next from tomorrow, the biggest budget ever. We keep saying this all day from tomorrow, the biggest budget ever. No input from the opposition whatsoever.
Yeah. And just to add further to what Mr. Harris asked there is that what the opposition has effectively requested from 2020 to now, for more time to be allocated for us to scrutinize the budgetary allocations. We have requested every single budget for more time for us to go through, and at no point in time were those requests adhered to. No consideration is ever given from the part of the government. And we don't expect any difference, like Mr. Patterson's rightly saying. And in addition to those, a lot of time commitments are made at the level of the ministers when it comes to questions that we're gonna supply those responses after. And as Mr. Patterson has highlighted prior, there is no timeline being given to the ministers to actually answers to those questions that we asked. You would recall that it was in the supplemental that was brought in National Assembly last year. Mr. Patterson had asked some questions. I saw the response come to my email today. So there's absolutely no time frame for those responses to be given, and because of that, whatever issue is pertinent today, we may have a response for it when the issue is no longer alive. That's my answer to that.
Thank you, Joretta. Mr. Harris, do you have another question?
Yes, a quick follow. Yes, I have another question, but a quick follow-up. Ms. Finance in her speech said we would like the government to. In my humble opinion, it's a waste of time asking them to do anything because they're not listening to you. But my question, substantive question to you, Ms. Finance, is when you spoke on the cash grant issue at Bartica, you said dead names were called. Jagdeo turned up to say no such thing. Do you stand by your statement?
Thank you, Mr. Harris. I stand by my statement 100%. I did not go out there and single-handedly said Joretta Finance is saying that dead people names are being called. I effectively shared that Mr. Jagdeo was commenting and responding to my Facebook post that I made. I made several Facebook posts, and if he was honest, which he never is, he would have said that I shared the comments of residents of Bartica that stated quite clearly that their relative's name were called that were deceased some 4 years ago and some 11 years ago. When and I'll give you this example, when I got into a taxi, right in Barker, the man said, oh, he's so happy to see me because his father's name was called, and his father and his brother, his eldest brother, shared the same name. So they were junior, senior, and junior. His father was deceased some number of years ago. And when his junior, the one that is alive, when he turned up to receive the money, they said, oh, well, it's not for you. It's your father. It's a senior. So I say to Mr. Jagdi, I stand by that. And what he can further say is that after those statements were made by me, what the Ministry of Finance did was put a halt to the cash grant distribution in Barticum. So maybe he can further clarify why that was done. And in addition to that, I will say that I have been monitoring very closely how the cash grant system, particularly what is online right now, for you to go and verify what is the position of your checks. People are tracking their checks to the point that everybody know their ID number out of their head because they have inputted it so many times looking to see if there's any change in what the status is of their cash grant. And what I can tell you is that the Ministry of Finance, that is the body that is actually monitoring our system, to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, but they started to give locations for the check. One particular person in Bartica, he gave me his ID number. I went online and I checked it. His check was at MOA. Last I checked, MOA was Ministry of Agriculture. After that, my grandmother, her check was slated to be picked up at least 8 different places. The only place it was not slated to be picked up was at the location that she picked it up at. So we have so many issues with the cash grant system that Mr. Jagdier can go and he can talk whatever he wants, and it doesn't impact the fact that we have persons on the ground that are looking online for their status to be updated. It's not being updated. We have no answers as to the $30.5 billion that was collected in the National Assembly for those monies to be dispersed by the end of 2024. So those are the questions that we definitely need answers from Mr. Jagdi, or not just trying to have a verbatim dispelling of claims that were made from relatives of deceased persons that their names were on the list. That's my answer to that.
Thank you, Ms. Finance. Adam, you have a substantive question. I think that was a follow-up.
If you'd allow me one other question.
Sure.
I'm done with the cash grant for now. Although I ain't get me on, and I ain't expect to get me on. Ms. Finance, you also spoke of gold production, and you noted the decline. Does this have anything to do with the absence of the large-scale gold producers who at one time contributed, or are they still contributing, but this decline continues to be down?
So the first thing I want to say is that the figure for gold, if you go to the Ashley Singh's budget speech for tomorrow, no, I don't have it as yet, but I can tell you what he's going to say. He's going to say that there were significant increases in the production, in the declaration rather, of gold from 2023 to 2024, and he would be correct, because in 2023 I believe it was just over 200,000 ounces, and now you're having 434,000 ounces. What I am stating here and referring to is that in 2019 the production was 634,000 ounces, and in 2024, with such a significant budget, with the government saying that they're doing so much when it comes to the non-oil sector, such an important sector as gold, we are seeing that they are yet to get back, and 2024 they were 200,000 ounces less than we were in 2019. Woefully inadequate.
I hope that answers your question.
I think, sorry, Beverly, I think Mr. Harris is asking what is the cause. And what I can tell you, Mr. Harris, is that anybody that knows about the mining industry, particularly gold mining, when the prices are high, that is the highest incentive for persons to go in and to actually work for production. So now we're talking about a system in which the price of gold in 2024 was significantly higher than it was in 2019, which would be a very good way of incentivizing miners, small, medium, large scale, to actually go in and produce. So as to whether or not the declaration is matching the production, it's quite clear for me. It is not matching up. Saying that you have 434,000 ounces being declared is not saying that 434,000 ounces were produced. And I think that is a good distinction that we need to make. So government is certainly not doing anything in their power to actually up the declaration and to make sure that gold is not put in a way in which it's not declared. It's not utilized in a way in which it's not declared.
Thank you, Joretto. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, any other questions? I see Musa has a hand up. Please go ahead.
Yes, good
Shamar?
afternoon. Can you guys hear me? Yes, good afternoon. Yes.
Go
Can you
ahead,
guys?
Shamar.
Okay, perfect. The AFC is yet to present its pathway to the future. Is this something that would be presented to the public soon? And could you say what are some of the things contained in this plan?
Mr. Hughes will take that question.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the question. We will be releasing within the next, I think it's 3 to 4 weeks, actually in serialized form, various aspects of the pathway to the future. They will cover everything from the economy to business development, to development for women, social development, education in particular, indigenous policy, indigenous land policy, our proposals for protection of our international borders. It will be quite a comprehensive plan. And of course, on youth.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. You have a
A
follow-up,
follow-up, Mr. Musa?
If he ain't ready, I can get another one, if you'd allow me.
Go ahead, Mr. Harris. But we will come back to Shamar.
All right. Now, has been doing a great job tracking the incomplete projects. Now, on the eve of this budget presentation, have you been able to detail the extent of incompletion? Because I expect to see monies allocated to these same projects this year. What could I expect you and your colleagues in the opposition to do in the face of such obviously blatant disregard for the rules of law, money expended and all of that?
Adam, you actually going to preempt my speech, but actually, you are absolutely right. I started at several press conferences ago highlighting the projects and the promises that the PPP has made, and call it, and I went back to look at the transformational, they call it transformation infrastructure project that they would have listed in every budget since 2020, starting when Egil did his own and up to Ashley own. And I'm quite sure in 2025 you will have a line head map transformation infrastructure. I intend to go and dissect and highlight to the nation all the wastefulness that has happened. But I can say broadly that nothing, absolutely not one of the transformational infrastructure projects that they had promised has been completed. Some haven't even started. I mean, if you look every single day, you see them turning the sod. Judy mentioned it for projects last year and this year as well. So They intend to run a billboard campaign whereby they'll just put a billboard saying "coming soon." You know, like when the days when it used to be at Aston. You remember that in Metropole, Adam, when you have big billboards showing what is coming soon. That is all they'll be doing. You could start with a Mila project, which I go into detail, which should be very interested in the budget. I mean, that's been a stillborn baby that they've did me with use a defibrillator on about 18 times, and it still is dead. And they'll come back with it again.
And then they blame the coalition
And they
for
blame,
not being there.
yes, then they blame the coalition. So they raise up the jumbie of a mile of fall. They'll tell you about the Demerara Harbor Bridge, and they'll tell you about Panama, and they'll probably make a case for Donald Trump to take over Panama and the shipping lane, because just because of the Panama, the Demerara Harbor Bridge hasn't been finished. They'll tell you the gas to shore project, and they'll explain to you how big the project is, that they've received a loan from Exim Bank, but they won't tell you that it's incomplete and will be incomplete in 2025. They will not give you, and I can guarantee you, Adam, the Minister of Finance, will not say to the people of Guyana that we will be charging you a definitive number cost for the kilowatt hour. They'll say, oh, significantly reduced. And everyone knows that they only say that because they've already started. They started out by saying half the price we pay now. They've now gone to significantly reduced. So if you reduce it by 10%, they claim that as a victory. But we know now that it's not. And you run through all the projects. I will have quite an enjoyable time speaking about the ferry that was supposed to come between Guyana and Barbados and Trinidad in 3 months' time. Obviously, it's a rowboat, and somebody is paddling. I do hope that they get to land shore safely, because obviously, I mean, they passed through the hurricane season and they're still alive. We will speak about the Linden Sioux Dike Highway, where you can go down. I mean, we talk about Bamia. I will definitely have an enjoyable time to speak about Bamia, that it's now 3 years and counting. The person's in nursery school and now gone into big school, waiting to go to Bamia Bamia School. So Adam, I mean, they will just gloss over these things. We'll have a great time discussing Edgill's office complex, which they've spent $7 billion for, and they just said recently it's 10% completed. Adam, you could pass there. There's some toothpicks for timber piles up there, and that's what they spent $7 billion on. You know, I mean, I would really do envy the contractor. So I mean, of course, they only allow me 30 minutes, so I have to prioritize the ones that they haven't done. You know, I mean, but every single project. I mean, they're supposed to be an airport in Palmyra. Now, if any pilot had heard that announcement and he's Mayday, he's in distress, he heads to Palmyra, it's dead, everybody on that plane dead. God didn't even mark out the airstrip yet, you know what I mean? They're supposed to be, we're supposed to be playing cricket in Palmyra as well. The people in London can't run a race, we left them with a track. So Adam, I don't want to preempt my budget speech, and I mean, I just by answering it's already taken up 10 minutes already. But it will be worth listening to, Adam.
Thank you, the Chairman of the party, David Patterson. Adam, if it was possible, I would also give David my 15 minutes, just so that he can add in all the supernatural forces,
Yes,
and the bad blood and early morning seance and so on. Do we have any further questions? I don't.
Yes, they got, sorry,
Please go
they
ahead.
got questions. I ain't see my colleagues shooting up.
Well, go ahead,
Um,
Adam. I think you're asking for them today.
this is another general question. Mr. Hughes, I don't know what you're going to be talking. I don't think you're in the parliament, so you aren't going to be talking tomorrow.
No, happily, Adam, happily, I'm not in the National Assembly. Not at all.
Yeah, but Ms. George talked about the demarcation of lands for indigenous people and all of that. And this is a program that's going on. You demarcate this year, and then you go back and demarcate next year and all of that. Ms. George, is there a systematic manner in which this demarcation process is being done? And are the communities happy with what it's being done?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Harris. So, is there a systematic manner? Now, the PPP likes to say that the coalition did nothing in the years that they were there, but from 2016 to 2017, the coalition worked along with other groups, which included the APA. I was there. So we outlined what requires or what is a systematic manner into what is the Amerindian Land Titling Project guideline. Because we knew that there were so many communities that were not happy with the demarcations that had taken place. For example, I gave examples earlier. For example, one community which would have been like Hotokwai, doing its demarcation exercise, but did not follow their description on the absolute grant. And the piece that was left out actually was said to be an extension. That was what the ministry had told them before the coalition time. They were not pleased with what had happened during those years. And because we saw that there's an opportunity under the project, which when signed was 2.2 billion Ghana dollars in 2013. So that was what is supposed to be a systematic way, which also requires inclusion of neighboring communities. So that is why we developed that guideline. Now, last year when the government announced that Mokomoko had received its absolute grant, they were really talking about an absolute grant to their extension, which is a piece to Mokomoko, because Mokomoko had already been titled and demarcated years ago. So is there a systematic way in doing this? There should be a systematic way in doing this, meaning neighboring communities such as St. Ignatius, which now questions how this was completed because they had an agreement working towards how these lands will be shared, the resources to be shared as a neighboring community during the coalition time. So the system to that they were working on is the customary systems to be guided by what should have been a policy document. And today, they don't have to be like fighting with each other. So what should be a systematic way has not been made to work. It has instead caused communities to be divided. Some villages, for example, Oriala, that had a contention with the Forestry Commission and the forest concession holder over the years and being charged. The GFC likes to say they were being compensated. Went on its own, following the laws, following a system, and following the law that says they can get their own sworn land surveyor to demarcate their boundary, or to, redefine their boundary to prevent any further encumbrances or any further issues with the Forestry Commission and the concession holder. That community in the end was pleased because it showed that they did it themselves with the support of the surveyor who respected their knowledge of the customary knowledge and customary, and also their knowledge using GPS systems in which the residents knew to do that. Today, Oriala is still not in receipt of its certificate of title. So what should be a system that also respects indigenous peoples to utilize the resources along the laws and all of that is still not being respected by the government of Guyana. So that would be my response. And I just want to go back to that. The project, its overall amount was 2.2 billion in 2013, but from 2021 to 2024, the PPP administration has spent more than 2.4 billion, at least using the figures that they've given. And the question will be, which other villages need to be the grants and the extensions and demarcations that need to be done. How much are they looking to submit or present to the budget, in the budget? But really, the recommendation is that there needs to be a lot more enhanced, transparent, and inclusive process that involves Indigenous peoples in this demarcation exercise.
Thank you, Laurel. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Hughes will make a statement now on a meeting the AFC had earlier today.
Good afternoon, members of the press again. This afternoon, we met with the Private Sector Commission. It appeared to be the full commission, and the AFC took a pretty large team. There were a range of topics that were discussed at that meeting. The AFC, of course, presented its vision for the country over the next 10 to 15 years and the critical areas for discussion. Various members of the AFC contributed to that presentation. The private sector also, the private sector concentrated their areas of interest to electoral matters, and we discussed elections and electoral matters.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, any other questions?
Good afternoon.
Adam?
I heard Dennis.
Yes, I'm here.
Dennis, you have a question?
Yes, Mr. Hughes, Dennis Shibal Morales, could you say exactly what it is that the Private Sector Commission wanted to know about electoral matters, and what were some of your responses?
The Private Sector Commission expressed confidence in the GCOM, and we expressed the exact opposite, a complete lack of confidence. We identified the several areas which has caused us, caused us to not have confidence or lose confidence in GCOM and its chairmanship. We provided the reasons why we arrived at those conclusions. We informed them that we have been invited by GCOM to meet with them next week, I think it is, and they indicated that they hope that we raise these concerns with GCOM, which we obviously will, and that we could perhaps speak with them after we have met with GCOM, or speak with them again, I should say, after we've met with GCOM on the issues that we raised.
Did they give a commitment that they will also seek to have any responses from GCOMs to your concerns?
Can you please repeat that, Dennis?
Vaguely heard that, Dennis.
Did the Private Sector Commission give any commitment that they will also seek to interface with GCOM to ascertain what it is as regards your concerns?
Well, they said they had met with GCOM. Did they say they were going to meet with them again?
They said they're, based on our concerns, they are going to take what they indicated was based on the concerns we raised and certain things that was said from our side. They were not aware of such, and they would have to meet back and clarify with GCOM those issues.
Any further questions?
Me, I'm a big mouth. Just one. Sorry you're taking up so much of time. Now, this one has to do, again, I'm going to ask Mr. Patterson to help. Sir, given the loan that was granted by U.S. Exim Bank and all of that, are you aware of what the repayment terms are? Like I hear Jack Dio tell us we must go and ask Exim Bank.
Sorry, Adam. Right. I mean, what I'm aware of is what was stated publicly by Jack Dio and others. I mean, that is 4%. I had a very good friend who was in the banking system calculate the interest and the repayments, and he confirmed the numbers put out by Kaichur News. I think it's $317 million in interest And he did give me the bankers, bankers are one of the best people in calculating how much money you owe them. So he sat down and he calculated it. So over the 15 years, we will be repaying over $800 million, which has to be added to the project. In addition to that, Adam, there are 2 claims, which is $100 million. So obviously, in theory, I do anticipate, and I've said it before, that when you have claims in a construction project at the beginning, any experience has said that 9 times out of 10, those claims are successful, which basically means that a man provided you a quote to build your house, and you said your house is going to be on flat land, and then you reach to the site, it's on a hill. Obviously, you can't, and he can't build it, you have to do additional work. That's the genesis of claims so early. Of course, Jack Dio has admitted its issues to do with the foundation and soil stabilization and those things like that. So, in theory, I anticipate that both claims will be successful in most part. So you have to tack that on to the $871 million we'll be paying back. Added to the $1 billion we'll be paying back to Exxon. Added to the sum we're paying to the Indian firm for the construction of the transmission and distribution line. Added to that, you have to add on the cost of the rentals of these power ships and those things like that. And then when you put everything into the basket, Adam, then is when you will know exactly how much this project has cost. I mean, and the way it's going, the price tag may well past $3 billion. And of course, I restate publicly my reservation that they would ever be able to achieve the committed price to the consumer, unless once again we do something like Jack Dio, I'm a special at, dig another hole to fill this hole, whereby if they now heavily subsidize GPL. This project is supposed to make GPL self-sufficient, but as we've seen, like with Skeldon, which was the project that broke Gaisuko, they say this project has the capacity to break GPL, but it doesn't take much to break GPL. So, the birds have done that. I mean, errant minibus drivers has broken GPL. So this year definitely would write their death sentence if they have to foot the bill repaying for this project.
Adam, I just wanted to add that it is completely unacceptable for the president to suggest, the vice president, or the 4th-term president, whichever one, to suggest that we must go to Exim to get the feasibility study. The government of the day, irrespective of whichever government it is, must share with the population any feasibility study, economic or otherwise, for most projects, but particularly for large-scale projects. So we repeat our demand for the production of the feasibility study, and we think it's an insult to the people of Guyana to invite them to ask Exim. So we repeat the demand for that. And I just want to add, as we're coming to the end, the census is still not being released. We published earlier this week the results of earlier censuses and the decline and increases that they showed, and our extrapolation from that information based on the rates of growth does disclose some very interesting results that we anticipate. And so we want to repeat again our demand for the release of the census, which is now 2.5 years old. Overdue, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Nigel Hughes. A follow-up, Dennis, or another question? I see your hand up.
Yeah, it's actually going back to my earlier question, Mr. Hughes. Exactly what would your party expect from the private sector as it relates to dealing with the question of preparations for the general and regional elections?
Well, we hope that we are all committed to a credible result being announced after the election. And in this regard, we hope that the private sector will support our call for biometric verification of the votes. They asked questions today about whether or not that could be done within the constitutional due date for the holding of elections. And we expressed the view that as of January the 16th, 2025, we believe this can be done within the constitutional period. Clearly, if you ask me this question in June, my response might be different.
Does that answer your question, Dennis? I still see your hand up.
Oh, yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen of the media, any other questions? I see no other hand up. And so, ladies and gentlemen, as we wrap up this media conference, let me inform you that during the budget debates, our members of parliament will be available to answer your questions. I know that only a limited number of cameras will be allowed in the dome, but you can grab any of our members of parliament during the course of debate in the corridor or in our committee room, because we expect to have a lot of discussion on fraud, mismanagement, siphoning off of public funds, and as you're well aware, we cannot speak of corruption, at least not in the dome. So we look forward to your cooperation. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the media.